Thank you. We turn now to our order paper and tabled questions for all answer. Question 1 is in the hands of the Honourable Member for Arbory, Castletown and Malew, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Chief Minister whether an investor visa route to the island remains open and whether the closure of the investor visa route to the UK will have had an impact on this, and what is being done to mitigate any risk to the island's open door policy. Thank you.
Chief Minister to reply.
Mr Speaker, the Isle of Man Tier 1 investor visa was closed to new applicants on the 23rd of February 2022 after a move from the UK closing their foreign investor route due to security concerns about the source of funds that have been used in some applications. The Tier 1 investor visa was a route for high net worth individuals making a substantial financial investment to the island, with individuals requiring a minimum of £2 million in investment funds to apply. Since 2014, only 6 applications have been made for the Isle of Man Tier 1 investor visa, one of which was refused. No new applications have been received since 2017. The island's Tier 1 investor visa has been closed to new applicants in order to avoid a surge of applications being made under the island's route following the route's closure in the UK. Current holders of a Tier 1 investor visa may, though, continue to apply on this visa route through to settlement. Immigration, Mr Speaker, does not have an open door policy as referred to by the Honourable Member. Whilst the island has the ability to apply its own tailored immigration policies within the overall framework of integrated immigration laws, and for the island to be able to respond to local immigration and labour needs, there is a need to ensure that national immigration legislation is broadly compatible with that across the common travel area. This is to prevent any one constituent part of the common travel area acting as a backdoor. The island works closely with the UK and the Channel Islands to ensure such approaches to controlling immigration needs are implemented in a way that is compatible with maintaining this flexibility. As honourable members are aware, the Immigration Act 1971 of Parliament provides much of the statutory framework for immigration control. This Act is extended to the Isle of Man by the Immigration Isle of Man Order 2008 as amended, and confers powers on the Minister for the Cabinet Office to exercise immigration control in the island. The legislative foundation for freedom of travel within the common travel area is set out in Section 1(3) of the United Kingdom's UK's Immigration Act 1971. Arrival in and departure from the UK on a local journey from or to any of the islands, the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man, or the Republic of Ireland shall not be subject to routine immigration control. Section 9(5) of the UK Immigrations Act 1971 goes on to state that if it appears to the Secretary of State necessary to do so by reason of differences between the immigration laws of the UK and of the islands, i.e. the Crown dependencies, he may by order exclude the island from Section 1, subsection 3. A power which has been held by the UK since 1971. Therefore, in order to ensure that journeys within the CTA remain free from routine immigration control, the Isle of Man maintains broadly compatible immigration laws with the UK. In addition, Schedule 4 of the UK Immigration Act 1971, as it applies in the Isle of Man, ensures that the immigration laws of the Isle of Man, UK, Jersey and Guernsey are integrated, providing that where immigration permission is granted, that permission is recognised within the CTA. Therefore, those with valid visas are free to travel within the CTA. Finally, Mr Speaker, each jurisdiction's ability to apply its own tailored immigration policies within the overall framework of integrated immigration laws continues to be important to allow each jurisdiction to respond to local immigration and labour needs. However, there is a need to ensure that national immigration legislation is broadly compatible across the CTA to prevent any one constituent part of the CTA acting as a backdoor. A replacement for the investor route will be introduced in the future. I hope that fully answers the member's question.
Oh, right. Supplementary question, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Chief Minister, for such a detailed answer. The UK closed their investor routes on February the 17th, and we did it on Ireland on the 23rd of February. Why did it take us that additional time to make the announcement? Was it actually planned to continue as we were? Was there a specific reason for that extension? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
I think that was just a case of assessing the implications of the UK decision, Mr Speaker.
You supplementary, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. The statement issued on the 23rd of February stated replacement for the investor route will be introduced in the near future. Will the Isle of Man simply replicate the UK offering, or is there plans to do something more innovative here? Thank you.
Minister.
I don't know at this stage, Mr Speaker. We will be looking at potential replacements, as I said.
Final supplementary question, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Chief Minister. This could be a little bit of replication. In your answer, you made reference to there being no recent applications, but were any applications put in after the statement was put out on the 23rd of February, or is that something you're not aware of yet, given the processing requirements? And the assumption that if there were any put in after, sorry, just prior to that date, they will continue to be processed as any other items will be. Thank you.
Minister.
Yes, they will continue to be processed if they were already in train prior to that date, and I will have to confirm in writing whether or not any applications were received between the two respective dates.
Question 2, again, calling the Honourable Member for Arbory Castletown, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Chief Minister whether he's aware of the challenges faced by some residents in obtaining and retaining credit cards, and if he will make a statement.
Calling the Chief Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The provision of credit cards to residents of the Isle of Man is ultimately a commercial decision for providers to consider based on a range of factors. The choice of providers has been of concern over recent years. The Isle of Man Financial Services Authority continues to monitor the availability of credit to Isle of Man residents from banks licensed in the Isle of Man, and this includes the availability of credit cards from the wider banking group. I am aware that in recent months the breadth of choice available to residents appears to have reduced, and therefore residents may experience difficulty in renewing or obtaining credit card facilities from certain providers. Providers who have no presence on the Isle of Man are of course not regulated by the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority. I regret the decision by Tesco Bank to write out to existing cardholders giving notice of cessation of services. In 2018, the Department for Enterprise contacted Tesco Bank to better understand their concerns and explain that there were no legal or regulatory barriers that precluded the provision of credit card services. These services were ultimately retained. However, Tesco Bank has subsequently recommenced this process in recent weeks. The Department for Enterprise has therefore met with Tesco Bank to explore further their decision, and although it remains the case that they plan to withdraw services as a result of these discussions, I am pleased to confirm that Tesco Bank have agreed to defer the cessation for a further 6 months. They will be contacting account holders directly, but this will give everyone time, I hope, to identify alternative options. The Department will continue to liaise with all previous on and off island providers of credit cards to the Isle of Man residents to ensure that they understand that there appears to be no legal prohibition under UK law to prevent UK regulated credit card providers from issuing cards to our residents, and continue servicing the Isle of Man and consider servicing, the Isle of Man once again. Ultimately, however, this has been a commercial decision for providers, and the majority of service providers have always been located in the UK. Meanwhile, we are aware of a number of banking groups with a presence in the Isle of Man who may continue to provide credit cards to their customers who are island residents, albeit this service is sometimes only available via an online application to the part of the wider group that provides credit cards. We would suggest that customers speak therefore to local banks in the first instance. The Department for Enterprise has also spoken directly with the local banking community, and HSBC have confirmed that they are fully open for considering applications for credit cards from Isle of Man residents, customers and non-customers, and potential applicants should visit the branch. It may well be that although there are no legal inhibitors, the fact that the island has a separate consumer credit regime and recovery process for bad debts has increasingly deterred some providers, and there may be other concerns that are inhibiting providers from providing financial services to the Crown dependencies more generally. The Department for Enterprise will lead on the further analysis, working together with the Treasury and the FSA in this space to better understand any options for expanded provision that may be available.
Supplementary question, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Chief Minister, for such a comprehensive answer. The government has challenged this Tesco suggestion about the Brexit issue. However, the ring fencing that was introduced in January 2019 appears to be the limiting factor for many providers. Is it now the case that we only have one credit card provider who are prepared to issue new cards and reissue existing cards to users? is there anything the government could do in addition to the huge list of things that was suggested in the previous answer? Thank you.
Chief Minister to reply.
Well, as I said, to simplify things, Mr. Speaker, Department for Enterprise continue to liaise with banks on this matter. We are not aware of any legal impediment to the provision of credit cards in the Isle of Man. Although the Isle of Man is clearly a different jurisdiction and outside the UK when it comes to aspects such as the Consumer Credit Act and debt recovery. But whilst there are similarities, there are also differences in each of the Crown dependencies. And therefore we consider this very much a commercial decision by the operators. We'll continue to work with them to try and continue to ascertain their reasons and hopefully try and alleviate some of their fears in respect of credit card provision on the island.
Supplementary question, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the announcement by the Treasury Minister that there's full recognition of the issues with consumer credit and debt recovery arrangements in the Isle of Man. That's a very important point for housing and tackling housing crisis in the island too. Can the Chief Minister confirm that it's Treasury that's leading the consumer credit and debt recovery arrangement changes which it initiated in 2016 with an excellent three-phase approach, and that the Department for Enterprise is limited in terms of talking with banks about credit card opportunities and financial services more generally, or has Treasury passed that over to Department for Enterprise?
Minister to reply.
No, Treasury do in fact lead on, as the Honourable Member says, on those matters, including debt recovery, but of course it's quite correct to highlight that the Department for Enterprise is in fact the lead agency when it comes to these direct discussions.
On to Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has the government a duty to warn residents of the current situation? Those people applying for almost all credit cards with an IM postcode will be rejected, and that will potentially place a negative mark on the resident's credit score. This has the potential to then exclude some residents from other financial products, such as mortgages and insurance products. Thank you.
Minister.
I am not sure, actually, Mr. Speaker, as to the correctness of the on members' statement there that it will negatively impact on an individual's credit score. But as I said, there are credit cards available on the Isle of Man, and the Department for Enterprise continues to liaise directly with the local banking community. I can say, for example, that HSBC is one of the banks that has confirmed that they are open for considering applications for credit cards on the Isle of Man.
Question, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Chief Minister agree with me that it's important that we move immediately to phase 2 of Treasury's existing consumer credit and debt recovery plans, a phase that was stalled in 2018? And does the Chief Minister agree with me it would be excellent to work with the Bankers Association and the banks, including with the Housing and Communities Board, to make immediate progress to bring financial products to the Isle of Man across the piece, in recognition of the small size of our market, but also the significant differences that exist between our arrangements and our law compared to those across, which make it difficult for banks that have global risk, global compliance policies?
Well, reforming our debt recovery legislation is a hugely important piece of work, and absolutely endorse that the Treasury gets on and continues with the, I think, three-phased item of work. And of course, again, I absolutely endorse working with the banks to understand what products are available for island residents, and to ensure that we are able to access as island residents the full extent of banking provision and banking services on our island.
Final supplementary question, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this really is developing Mr. Thomas's point even further. Since the change in 2019, having a different consumer credit environment in the island has created many issues and many restrictions, and credit card users on the island aren't going to get the same opportunities as those in the UK until we actually get a real comparable situation when it comes to the consumer credit legislation. Thank you.
Chief Minister, I couldn't detect the question, but
I thank the Honourable Member for his statement,
yes,
but we're going to continue to work to try and overcome some of these issues.
now questions 3 and 4 covering the same issue to the same minister have been grouped together. So I'll first call on the Honourable Member for Arbory, Castletown and Malew, Mr. Glover, to ask his question. And then I'll call on the Honourable Member for Garff to ask his, and then we'll have a joint answer. Mr. Glover.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for Enterprise what is being done to allow island residents to apply to all UK credit card providers for a card.
And Honourable Member for Garff, Mr Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for Enterprise what action he plans to take following the recent withdrawal of Tesco credit card services to residents, and if he will make a statement.
On the Minister for Enterprise to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And unusually, I suppose I should express an interest, because I have a Tesco credit card and I've received one of the letters, as many other honourable members' constituents have. As noted earlier by the Chief Minister, the decision by Tesco Bank plc to withdraw their services from the island has been ongoing for some time. The Department has met with Tesco Bank to further explore their decision, and it remains the case that they plan to withdraw from the local market. The Department understands this decision is part of a longer-term withdrawal of services for all non-UK customers, and therefore citizens across all three Crown dependencies have been affected, including the Isle of Man. I'd like to make it quite clear to honourable members that this decision has been made by Tesco Bank, a separate entity to the retail part of the business. The recent news has no implications for the continuing operation of the Douglas store. Tesco's remains committed to a physical presence on the island, and I know that their local management team and staff provide excellent services to our community. Whilst there is no legal or regulatory barriers that preclude the provision of credit card services to Isle of Man residents, the provision of any service is a commercial decision for the provider. Following discussions with Tesco Bank, I'm grateful for their decision to pause the cessation of credit card services to island customers for a further 6 months. This will give those affected the opportunity to make alternative arrangements. As noted by the Chief Minister, the fact that we have separate legislation can be a challenge to servicing non-UK customers, which impacts on all the Crown dependencies. The Department will continue to liaise with the local banking community and other potential providers to explore a full range of options to ensure consumer services such as credit cards are fully available on this island. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr Glover.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that reply. You've had the letter, and I believe I've seen it from other constituents, and a poorly worded letter too, that you've now moved to a foreign country, I think is one of the phrases in the introduction on that letter. It just seems it's a little bit wider than just Tesco, though, because I'm led to believe that Amazon are now not accepting Visa credit cards, and people have tried to go for a MasterCard option. Can't get it from Tesco, can't get it from a number of other banking institutions on the island. So this does seem to be unfair on Manx residents who bank with all the main institutions. Can the Minister just please reassure the Manx population that all efforts will be made that will enable island residents to obtain credit cards?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And again, I'd like to thank the two honourable members for batching their questions together, which makes my life an awful lot better and stops me being accused of repetition. I completely agree with the honourable member in terms of the wording of the letter. Hello, Alex, as you now live abroad was the way my one started, which was quite strange since I've been paying their bills for the last 20 years from living here. As I said, this is an action from Tesco Bank. It is linked very much to their risk appetite and ring fencing, but he is quite right that the actions of Tesco Bank have opened the lid on various other financial institutions who do not have an Isle of Man banking licence, making different assessments of the risk of Isle of Man residents. Now, whilst the Chief Minister has quite clearly stated there is no risk, and our FSA has been trying to reinforce that, when I talked to Tesco Bank, they actually haven't been providing any new credit cards for the last 8 to 10 years to Isle of Man residents. So this is something that has been going on for some time. But the Honourable Member is absolutely right that people living on the Isle of Man or people relocating to the Isle of Man should not be disadvantaged by a lack of full financial products when they arrive here. And so we are working very closely with the FSA, with the Isle of Man Banking Association and all the banks on the island to try to make sure that credit card facilities can be offered. As the Chief Minister has already said, HSBC are quite willing to offer credit card provision to successful applicants who either have an account with them or don't have an account with them, and we'll be advertising this in the near future. There are alternatives. When he mentions Amazon Bank, there are a range of off-island banks that obviously aren't related to the jurisdiction of the FSA on the island, but we are working with them, with the wider banking sector, and hopefully with the Isle of Man Post Office to look at other options that can be made available for Isle of Man residents. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does somebody disagree with me that a solution must be found because the limiting the availability of credit cards is restricting the options of many island residents and businesses, and given the current financial challenges that many face, this option is an important one for many people? Thank you.
Reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for getting a second bite at the cherry with a very similar question to the one he asked the Chief Minister. Yes, if the situation does not improve, then Isle of Man residents probably would be disadvantaged. This is a decision made relatively recently by one provider, which actually shows that there are future challenges that will be met by the Department for Enterprise working in collaboration with the banking sector. And I'm also pleased to say that that collaboration with the banking sector has now led to the Isle of Man Bank postponing their decision to charge charities for banking services. They've paused that decision after further negotiations with the government. So those negotiations, now working with the banking sector, is reaping benefits and rewards and will continue. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr. Glover.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to thank the Minister for his very detailed reply. And I just want to pick up on one aspect that he mentioned there, which was, of course, the Post Office, because at the moment the Isle of Man Post Office doesn't have a credit facility, unlike the UK Post Office. So would you please provide a little bit more detail on those discussions?
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What we are now undertaking is to revisit some of the conversations that happened several years ago when previous problems occurred with the provision of credit card facilities. There are a number of financial institutions on Ireland who have an Isle of Man banking licence that did express an interest in providing products for Isle of Man residents. The Isle of Man Post Office has had a range of very successful financial services, including foreign currency provision, which have been taken up by a lot of residents, and so we want to work with them to get a solution for Isle of Man residents, and we'll be doing this over the coming weeks. Thank you.
Final supplementary question, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that for the future of the tax that we collect from the financial services, banking, and also the employment in the Isle of Man, that it's important that the Isle of Man does remain outside the UK ring fencing regime? Secondly, does the Minister agree with me that differences in consumer credit, like for instance to do with the need to specify the annualised percentage return, are not likely to be fundamental to the existence of a banking sector in the Isle of Man outside the UK ring fencing regime, and we should make as much progress as quickly as possible in bringing in line consumer protection regimes in the island with those across? And thirdly, does the Minister agree with me that the Post Office here already successfully works with financial services institutions as an agency partner, has considered white labelling products from elsewhere in the past, and welcomes development of a better understanding of the possibilities and the expectations of the government and the people in that space?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I completely agree with the Honourable Member that the banking sector, all those who work in it on Ireland, is extremely important for our economy. Just this morning, prior to coming to this Honourable Court, I was at a breakfast meeting with the finance agency and with representatives of the finance sector, and we stressed the importance, both in terms of the economy, but also the worldwide spread that they have, and the importance of an ethical and sustainable financial sector on this island. In terms of his other comments about legislation, obviously the Chief Minister has already said that there is a commitment there to driving that forward. Finance Isle of Man is also working with the Treasury and FSA to review the insolvency legislation on the island as well. And I welcome his comments about the Isle of Man Post Office and the valuable work it does in extending financial services to those residents who don't have access to a high street branch. And look forward to our meeting this week to discuss how we, in terms of the Department for Enterprise, can further extend that. Thank you.
Question 5. Call on the Honourable Member for Arbory, Castletown and Malew, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Treasury Minister who has been engaged to procure investment managers, how they were selected, and what the cost of their services up to the end of the procurement process will be. Thank you.
On the Treasury Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As the Honourable Member has been advised on numerous occasions, so is fully aware, there is a current procurement process underway to appoint investment managers, so I'm very limited in what I can say due to the need for the utmost confidentiality in the procurement process. This is a Treasury procurement that is being run on its behalf by the procurement services at the Attorney General's chambers. This is the usual position for most Isle of Man government procurements. I can indicate the Treasury has received independent advice on certain aspects of its requirement from external advisers. However, as already indicated, I cannot provide any further information until the current procurement process has completed, as this risks completely undermining and prejudicing the current process.
Supplementary question, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. I recognise your position. This process is very different from what was in place previously. The complex assessments are necessary consequences of a new strategy. Why did the Treasury decide to change its core investment strategy, and was that option to retain the existing strategy for some of the funds considered, and if so, why was that dismissed?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Honourable Member again, as he did at the last sitting, is trying to tempt me to comment on the setup of an existing procurement process that is underway, and I cannot do so, Mr Speaker.
Another bite to the chair, Mr Moorhouse.
Please.
Good luck.
Just to clarify, I'm actually focusing on the process prior to the procurement process. I'm looking at the way in which the decision was made to actually leave what we had previously and go for something new. So it's just that kind of, why did we decide to change things around? Not what the consequences were. Thank you.
Treasury Minister.
Mr Speaker, it all forms part of the same process that leads to the procurement. As I have said to the Honourable Member before, once the procurement process is completed, I will quite happily share reams of information with the Honourable Member, but until the procurement process is completed, I cannot do so because I risk jeopardising the procurement process that is underway.
Turn to question 6. Call on the Honourable Member for Douglas East, Ms Farragher.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the Treasury Minister whether he has any plans to link benefit rates with inflation, what progress has been made with setting benefit rates as a proportion of the living wage, and if he will make a statement. Thank you.
On the Treasury Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It has been government policy for many years to consider the rate of inflation when reviewing the rates of social security benefits each year. For practical reasons, regard is had to the September inflation figure. That is the case both here and in the United Kingdom. Generally speaking, for contribution-based benefits, regard is had to the UK CPI on account of our reciprocal obligations with the UK Government. For benefits which are paid out of general revenue, regard is had to the Isle of Man CPI figure. The rates for each of the benefits and allowances are reviewed in the autumn of each year, with the new rates coming into effect from the first Monday after the beginning of the new tax year. It would not be possible to review them and introduce new rates more often than once a year. As regards the Tynwald resolution that income-related benefits should include a proportional link to the living wage, work is progressing towards this. However, the matter is not straightforward. Treasury will need to understand how this would work in practice, given the myriad of different household circumstances which exist within the island. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
On to question, Ms Farragher.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the Minister for his answer to the question. Just with regards to his response about setting benefit rates as a proportion of the living wage, the second part of my question, which was a Tynwald resolution. That Tynwald resolution stated that Treasury should lay a report on its findings before Tynwald by early 2022. Does the Minister not agree with me that this should have been done by now, or could the Minister confirm that this report on the setting of benefit rates is well underway, or let us know when we could expect that? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Since we're now currently, I think, 7 weeks into 2022, by my maths that is still quite early in 2022. It is still Treasury's intention to lay a report with the findings early in 2022.
Further supplementary, Ms Farragher.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So energy prices are rising sharply, food prices are rising and inflation is rising. Our calculated living wage puts our cost of living on a par with London. We know that people at the upper end of the economic spectrum can adapt to this, but how can we expect those in the lowest quartile to do so when we know that they're already choosing between heating and eating? Inflation disproportionately affects the poorest, which is something that the UK ONS, the Office of National Statistics, has acknowledged and confirmed that they will track how higher inflation affects the poor, and they'll release those statistics separately. Can the Minister confirm whether or not we have any data on this issue of the disproportionate effects of inflation on the poorest? And if not, will we be using that of neighbouring jurisdictions so that we can ensure that state support is linked to need?
Thank you. Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Yes, we do use the data that's available in the UK in relation to that to ensure that we look to meet the needs of those required. Just to say, though, Mr Speaker, in relation to benefits, most benefits that this year have actually risen by 5%, so 5% for income support, 5% child benefit, 5% disability living allowance, 5% EPA. Carers allowance has been increased by 15%, and income-based job seekers allowance has increased by 5%, and the pensioners premium as well has gone up by 5%.
Supplementary question, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister want to confirm today that the report that will be laid before Tynwald in early 2022 is the Social Security review that he's mentioned in answers in this place and elsewhere, and also in the Pink Book, or is there a separate Social Security review and a separate Social Security transformation project? And secondly, does the Minister want to confirm that every 5 years we have a household income and expenditure survey that actually looks at the proportion of expenditure on different items, which is carried out by the Isle of Man Statistics Office, which is part of Cabinet Office, and is used to calculate living wage proportions of expenditure and also the inflation indices?
Minister to reply.
Yes, Mr Speaker, happy to confirm the final points in relation to housing, the housing survey. In relation to the Social Security review, Mr Speaker, that is separate. That is looking at the interaction of benefits and how people can actually apply for benefits and how we ensure that people have got a one-point stop. That is not part of the resolution to Tynwald. It would be very hard to include it in a resolution that was there before we even announced the review, Mr Speaker. And equally, you know, if we could actually pull off a full review of the Social Security system in the space of about 3 months, I think that would have been a real feather in Treasury's cap, but it's not going to happen in that quick time.
Supplementary question, Ms Farragher.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Just with regards to the Treasury Minister's comments about the rise in the budget for benefits, which was 5% across income-related benefits. Obviously, last month, the month that the budget was released, inflation stood at 6.4%. So the purpose of my question is trying to get to how can we actually ensure that this situation doesn't arise again, and that benefit support is linked with need, that state support is linked with need. I also wanted to ask the Treasury Minister if he could answer the question of how many people, just so that we can understand how many people this affects. So how many people are in receipt of income-related benefits, which would include pensioners in receipt of supplementary benefit. Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Yes, thank you, Mr Speaker. I don't have the figures with me of who receipt and which benefits, but I will happily write out to members providing those figures. In relation to inflation and say the 6.4%, Mr Speaker, I think I've said on a previous occasion, we need to be a bit careful about the headline inflation rate, because there are certain things underneath that are actually driving that inflation rate. So, for instance, one of the big contributors is air travel, which has seen an inflationary increase of 79.9% in the last 12 months. If that's actually stripped out of the 6.4 inflation actually falls back to 3.9%. So we have to be a bit careful at the moment, because there are some contributory factors within the inflation calculation that are driving that inflationary rate.
Final supplementary, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just to clarify, it's not the housing survey, it's the household income and expenditure survey that provides data about poverty, just to make Hansard clear. So can the Minister advise then that the social security transformation project that's budgeted in the Building Great Communities part of the Pink Book is actually the social security review as well, and that there isn't any separate work going on in terms of a social security review beyond that, except that a report is being prepared in the first few months of 2022 about living wage and income and benefits. And secondly, can the Minister acknowledge that the government's cold, hunger and homelessness action plan, included looking at the 2018-2019 Household Income and Expenditure Survey to help alleviate poverty, but that the Poverty Committee accepted a slight twist when its report was debated, and we actually put that off to the next Household Income and Expenditure Survey in 2022, 23, 24, which is regrettable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought I'd said the Household Income and Expenditure Survey, but if I didn't, apologies. In relation to the transformation, I don't know how much more clear I can be. The report coming forward in early 2022 is in relation to the motion that came to Tynwald, which was Tynwald is of the opinion that income-related benefits should include a proportional link to the living wage, and the Treasury should review the current policy on setting benefit rates and report findings by early 2022. The setting of benefit rates is around the proportional link to the living wage, and that is what will be coming forward as per the Tynwald resolution. In relation to general social security transformation, that is a completely separate project that is taking place within Treasury.
Question 7. Calling the Honourable Member for Douglas Central, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg to ask the Minister of the Treasury what energy risks he is monitoring and what tools he has available to respond to those risks.
And the Treasury Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Department of Environment, Food and Agriculture are closely monitoring the effect that the current energy situation is having on the island. Therefore, the most appropriate risk for Treasury to monitor is the financial risk that the situation has presented. At the February sitting of Tynwald, in answer to a question posed by the Honourable Member for Arbory, Castletown and Malew, Mr Moorhouse, I provided details of the financial support that would be available to assist those with rising energy costs. I also stated that Treasury will continue to monitor the situation and the impact on our community that the energy situation presents, and Treasury stands ready to do so. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Question, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So I appreciate confirmation that the winter bonus payment and potentially other social security measures are in one of the tools. And also that the DEFRA is monitoring the need for an energy bill. Can the Treasury Minister advise further what he believes the Chief Minister meant in the introduction to our island plan when he talked about the key central question regarding energy security? What is that key central question, and does it go beyond a social security response and a possibility of an energy bill, which is defined as providing additional guarantees of security of supply to island consumers?
To reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I'm certainly not going to put words into the Chief Minister's mouth. If the Honourable Member wants to know what the Chief Minister meant, then he should really ask him. But what I would say is, in terms of energy security can mean a myriad of things. It can mean ensuring that you have a reliable supply. It means that you generate the energy yourself, so you have complete control over the energy factors. It can mean that you're linked to another energy supply that is equally secure, that provides a lower cost. There is a myriad of different things that energy security can feed, and certainly I'm not going to start putting words into other members' mouths, Mr Speaker. In relation to other tools that can be used, there is a variety of other tools available, Mr Speaker, but we have to recognise they all come at cost. There is things such as rebating on bills. There is targeted support for the fuel poor, again likely through rebates on bills. There's loan support to industry if things get serious in relation to industry. There's contracts of difference for renewable supplies, where government and industry agree a price for wholesale gas, and if the price is above this price, then government subsidises the difference. There's a multitude of tools out there, but we have to recognise there can be some serious costs to that.
Further supplementary, Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, so I appreciate the Minister's extensive reply and imagination about what it might mean. The only reference to what it actually means is in the island plan document, which is that we will develop a plan for energy security for our island with support from the Climate Change Transformation Board, bringing forward a bill for short-term energy security and publishing a plan for longer-term energy security by March 2023. Can the Minister confirm today then that that's in the hands of DEFRA from his answers earlier on? Secondly, during the budget, Mr Collister, as chair of the Manx Utilities Authority, raised the point that 16 million of costs have been shielded from consumers following on from wholesale gas price rises. And the Treasury Minister said in response to that Treasury has continued to work with the Manx Utilities Authority and will continue to do so as we go forward, particularly with the unprecedented market for volatility we are seeing around energy prices at the moment. Is the Treasury working just with Manx Utilities Authority in respect of protecting energy consumers, or is it working with other energy producers on the same basis?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We have been working with the MUA and we will continue to do so. In relation to the 16 million that through the hedging strategy of the MUA they've been able to protect from consumers, I think that is actually a very good news story. In terms of short-term energy security and long-term energy security, it divides across government departments, from DEFRA obviously that have their role to play, to Treasury that have their role to play. I'm not going to preempt any reports that may or may not be coming forward and what will be contained within them, Mr Speaker, and nor am I going to be tempted by the Honourable Member trying to extend this question out to other energy providers.
Final supplementary, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I don't think the questioner in any way is extending the question, because the question says what energy risks he is monitoring and what tools he has available to respond to those risks. So can the Treasury Minister then just confirm what he seems to have suggested in his answer just now, which is that the 16 million was solely created from hedging policy of the Manx Utilities Authority. It wasn't in any way using reserves of the Manx Utilities Authority generated from other resources to subsidise the price at which electricity is supplied to the market.
Minister to reply.
Mr Speaker, I think that's a question for the Chairman of the MUA.
Into question 8, and I call on the Honourable Member for Douglas Central, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg leave to ask the Minister for Health and Social Care what the spend on bank and relief staffing was in 2015-16, 2020-21 and from April 2021 to date, what proportion was spent at Nobles Hospital in each year, and what explains any changes in the total and proportionate spend.
The Minister for Health and Social Care to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The spending details are as follows. In 2015-16, the total DHSC agency spend was 14.8 million, of which 11.1 was spent at Nobles. The total DHSC bank spend for that year was 9.5 million, of which 6.8 million was spent at Nobles. For the other years in question, the information is not readily available as the department has restructured around care groups, not physical locations, and so splitting out the spend at Nobles is not possible in this short time frame. In 2021, the total DHSC agency spend was 5.7 million and the total bank spend was 10.08 million. In 2021, the total forecast spend for the year for Manx Care is agency at 7.4 million and bank at 11.4 million. In terms of the changes in the spend, the establishment of Manx Care saw the organisational structure move away from a hospital and community split and instead move towards a care pathway-based structure. For example, Community Children's Nursing Team is now in the same care group as the Children's Ward. Therefore, the expenditure data for these years is reflective of a different organisational structure compared to 2015-2016. The primary driver of bank and agency spend is to cover existing vacancies. However, intense competition in the UK agency market has also led to increases in rates for agency staff. Manx Care are alive to the risks presented by an over-reliance on bank and agency staff and are working on a number of initiatives to recruit, retain and train staff. In respect of the medical workforce, this includes the development of formal strategic partnerships with NHS providers to enable initiatives such as joint appointments and telemedicine links, transformation of clinical care through new models of care, and employing alternative workforce to bridge the gap of service provision, such as employing advanced clinical practitioners. In respect of the nursing workforce, Manx Care is modelling its workforce requirements for the next 5 years to help identify gaps, consider and advance mitigations accordingly. There are 4 primary mitigations at play here, which involve optimising the bed base to meet staffing capacity. This is a dynamic process which is assessed on a daily basis. International recruitment of registered nurses to help address long-standing gaps in the nursing workforce. This is underway as we speak. encourage and enable flexible retirement options for colleagues approaching retirement age, and exploring ways on-island pre-registration nurse training can be increased. Again, this is being assessed at present. Furthermore, the Office of Human Resources has worked with Manx Care to develop a recruitment strategy focusing on developing Manx Care's employer brand, ensuring Manx Care are proactive and competitive in the recruitment market.
Question, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I appreciate the answer, but the Minister will note that the question didn't actually ask about agency staff, it only asked about bank and relief staff, which is quite significant because I think they're separate issues. Does the Minister agree with me that there would seem to have been an increase from just less than £7 million annual spend on bank and relief staff to nearly 12 million in one version of the numbers I've seen, but in your version up to 11.4 million in 5 years, which mostly with a huge increase apparently in the NHS hospital, medical and dental staff. Does the Minister just want to put on record straight that policy for the last 10 years or so to replace bank and relief staffing with full-time staff hasn't worked? I mean, he really needs to focus on it, as does Manx Care, on actually changing that, as he's outlined in the initial answer.
Mr Triply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm not in a position to comment on the last 10 years of policy. That is not something that is within my remit. I would agree with him, however, that the cost of bank and agency staff has increased over the last few years, and we are seeing an over-reliance on that type of staffing, which is something Manx Care are working very hard to try and address, as I outlined in my original answer.
Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I just want to reiterate again, for the second time, the Minister talked about bank and agency staff. Agency contracts are very different from bank and relief staff. Bank and relief staff might well be made up of people who at one moment were working full-time and the next moment they're working on the bank and relief. I have seen correspondence which seems to suggest that in January 2022, bank and relief staff were being offered 2 times or 3 times the going rate to work in the hospital during months of January. Is the hospital now in a desperate situation where it's relying more and more on bank and relief staff, and consequently we really need to focus on keeping the full-time workers who are there already sweet and not encouraging them or allowing them or giving them incentives to move over to bank and relief staff, and second, through things like pay negotiations and terms, and secondly really thinking about improving our pitch of retaining the staff when they're first recruited to the Isle of Man. And secondly, did I hear that the Minister state that partial retirement might well be a way forward in this context, and can the Minister give further information about discussions that might or might not be ongoing about that?
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I don't have any information in respect of what was being offered during the month of January. I can say that during January, because of COVID-related absences, roughly 16% at one stage of staff in the hospital were absent, and I think that is what has placed significant pressure on the hospital over the winter period, notwithstanding the existing high vacancy rate. And I think that probably is what's factored into that very short-term significant issue. As I outlined in my answer, I think it's well known and well acknowledged that staffing situation within the health services is tight. It's under a lot of pressure. I've mentioned this a number of times in answer to various questions in this place and in Tynwald Court. Manx Care have quite a robust and quite a broad range of measures they're looking to take in respect of how we resolve this issue, how we recruit, retain and train the right number of staff. All of this will be underpinned by a complete review of the Manx Care establishment to identify exactly what their staffing requirements should be in terms of providing safe and effective and sustainable medical services on the Isle of Man.
On to question, Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. So just very briefly, does the Minister agree with me that given that it's been policy to reduce the bank and relief staffing and also the agency staffing for 10 years, he needs to go back as the new Minister and look to see why it might not have worked in the last 10 years before he plans what he's going to do now?
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Staffing matters are very operational in nature. It is not my job to determine staffing policy for Manx Care. Manx Care have determined their staffing policy, which is starting from a full review of their establishment to see what their staffing needs are. Manx Care will resolve this through some of the measures that I have outlined and a lot of other measures which I haven't talked about today on the 15 or so pages of supplementary information Manx Care very helpfully provided in respect of this issue. It is very much an issue that they're alive to and aware of. It is number one on their priority list. It is being addressed. And I think the Honourable Member, if you'd like to have more broader discussions about this, I'm more than happy to make time for the Honourable Member to come and spend time with me and with Manx Care to discuss some of these concerns more broadly.
Final supplementary on this question, Dr Allenson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Would the Minister agree with me that we owe a great vote of thanks to all those current and retired healthcare workers who were bank and relief staff manning the vaccination programme over the past couple of months. It has been very successful in breaking and severely linking the link between infection with COVID-19 and hospitalisation. Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Slightly outside the scope of the question, I feel, but I'm more than happy to agree with the honourable member, my honourable colleague from Ramsey. I think without the dedication and hard work of medical staff and nursing staff going above and beyond the call of duty over the last couple of months, over the last year or so, I should say, I don't think we'd be in the healthy position we are today.
Now, question 9 will be held over to next week as Mr. Wannenberg isn't present. Question 10, I call on the honourable member for Arbory, Castletown, Malew, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure what the total cost was of Civica housing management system and why it does not allow cash payments.
Call on the Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The approved budget for the Civica project from the Digital Strategy Fund is £597,680. The spend to date, as at the 14th of February, is £445,917. The project is ongoing and other future costs of the second phase of the project and their associated costs are forecast to be on track within the approved budget. Civica does allow cash payments, which can be made at the housing counter at Markwell House at the moment. Civica does not have the ability to produce the rent cards, though, and therefore the division cannot produce the rent cards as part of the rent paying process from April 2022. For the remainder of this financial year, tenants can continue to use their rent card to make their rent payments at post office counters, but as rent card can no longer be produced by this service, it will cease from the 4th of April 2022. We are working with those who have contacted us with any queries over the future payment of their rent.
Supplementary question, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Just for clarity, you refer to the end of the year. Is it the end of the financial year you're referring to in terms of continuing to pay in cash? And when was the system ordered and when will it be fully implemented? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Civica has been actively in use since July 2021 with the DOI, and all rent transactions are now being posted through it. From March 2022, the division will be working to enrol as many local authorities as possible onto the platform in a phased approach. This is still subject to agreement with the local authorities and the required service level agreements. Authorities that do not wish to use this system will continue to use their own system.
Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. When did the department become aware that you wouldn't be able to make a cash payment at the post office, and was any attempt made to come up with a solution to that, or was the simple, you cannot do this, seen as an adequate reason to stop accepting cash at the post offices? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
This system, I think Mr. Speaker, was brought on in some respects from what had been going on for the previous 2 years with regarding a transaction, the handling of cash and things, and talking to others. But it is also it's a web-based housing management solution which allows organisations to manage all of their processes in one place. The department can now manage tenancy management, housing waiting lists, rent accounts, housing maintenance, estate audits and reporting, all within one system. Civica also has a tenant portal which allows the tenants to manage certain things for their tenancy, such as their rent payments and their repair requests. There is also a contractor access portal within the Civica system which allows our contractors to take on maintenance job and book visits to carry out repairs. So the savings on this system are huge for the department, Mr. Speaker.
Final supplementary, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Given the availability across the island of this system in Markwell House and other local authorities, why isn't it being incorporated into the post office systems? Thank you.
Yes, to reply.
I'm not sure why that wasn't why that didn't happen, Mr. Speaker, but we are still working on the system, and it may well be that we can use this in other government hubs or with other local authorities as and when we've had those conversations, as we're talking to the local authorities from now.
Question 11, calling the honourable member for Arbory, Castletown, Malew, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Chair of the Post Office what discussions have taken place in the last 6 months between the Post Office and the Housing Division of the Department of Infrastructure about cash rent payments. Thank you.
Chairman of the Post Office to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isle of Man Post Office and Department of Infrastructure officers met on 20th of December. At that meeting, the department advised it was planning to withdraw the facility for its tenants to be able to make social housing payments through the Post Office's retail network from the beginning of April 2022. I understand a telephone discussion between the Chief Executive Officer of the Post Office and the Interim Chief Executive Officer of the Department took place on the week commencing 7th of February in relation to this matter, just after the Department had written to its tenants to advise them of the change.
Question, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chair. As a proactive business, has the Post Office been able to identify a solution to this challenge which would satisfy both the tenants and DOI? As we potentially heard earlier, the system could potentially be incorporated into the Post Office network. Thank you.
Chairman to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Post Office is pleased to provide agency services for the Department of Infrastructure in social housing rent collection, in vehicle licensing, for the Treasury in terms of social security and pensions, and it's always pleased to work with government. I've got to be honest, the Post Office hadn't had any contact about Civica, and it was me who brought it to the Post Office's attention when this question was put on the order paper.
Question, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chair. That last sentence was really incredibly important. Given your awareness and your apparent desire to do something, is it possible that in the remaining days that you could have a conversation with DOI Housing and find a solution to this problem? It doesn't seem to be a huge problem, and it seems something that can be achieved. Does the Chair believe that can be done? Thank you.
Chairman to reply.
Thank you. I've got to be straight, which is that the Post Office has a good working relationship with the Department of Infrastructure and the Minister for Department for Enterprise at the moment, and the Post, which is the Post Office's sponsoring department. And our advice to the Department of Infrastructure remains that which we gave on the 20th of December, which is that the Board is preparing a paper for Council on the retail network and the scope of services to be provided for the remainder of the current administration. And the Post Office has always suggested and continues to suggest that a decision on the future of the social housing payments should be incorporated into the wider review of community hubs, of government access, of access to government services. And we do hope that we had hoped by the end of this month, but we now hope, the end of February, but we now hope as soon as possible Council will make decisions in respect of the retail network, the Post Office's retail network, and the provision of government services through it.
Then to question 12, I call on the Honourable Member for Ayr and Michael, Mr Johnston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I ask the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs what is being done to address speeding on country roads?
On the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm grateful for the question, but its breadth means there is no simple or concise answer, and so I hope honourable members will allow me longer than usual to provide a comprehensive response. Much of the Isle of Man's near 700 miles of road are in the countryside, and a considerable part of those roads are not subject to a speed limit. For example, this is the case on the A18 Mountain Road, where there are no speed limits from just outside Ramsey until close to Onken, and therefore where speed enforcement cannot take place. However, this does not mean that the speed of vehicles on that road is being ignored, and work is underway that in part focuses on a series of collision cluster sites where injury collisions have occurred. The Tynwald approved Road Safety Strategy 2019 to 2029 led to the creation of a road safety partnership which brings together several different public service organisations with the intention of making our roads safer. The partnership is working to achieve an ambitious Vision Zero target, where no one would be killed or seriously injured on our roads. Its work is focused on the safe systems approach to road safety, which is widely used throughout Europe, and one element of which is safe speeds. Most drivers are good at perceiving risks when driving, and they effectively manage their speed in line with those perceived risks. However, some are not, and data from road traffic collisions and from enforcement activity is used to ensure that speed limits are appropriate and effective. The Isle of Man Constabulary then targets its approach to enforcement, focusing on places where the risk to the public is highest, where the data shows that collisions are most likely to occur, or individual drivers who are known for or suspected of driving in a way that might cause harm. The Constabulary has a specific approach to enforcement, which includes deployment of a task force of regular police officers and special constables who focus on enforcement in specific places where data or public complaints indicate a problem exists and on specific types of offence. But speed enforcement is limited by whether or not a road is subject to speed restrictions. The Road Safety Partnership has established a safer speed delivery group, which is working to ensure that speed limits are appropriate, that enforcement action is focused, and that special attention is paid to places where collisions are most likely to occur. Police enforcement activity is often undertaken as a direct consequence of feedback from the public or from partner agencies, such as local authorities. Regular meetings with such partners can and do lead directly to the police carrying out enforcement activity where residents have concerns. Police social media streams are also periodically used to ask the public where they would wish enforcement activity to take place. In the year ahead, work will continue to create a community speed watch scheme, which will allow local people to play a part in monitoring and deterring speeding in the towns and villages in which they live. Addressing speeding is not just about enforcement. The Road Safety Strategy's Safer Systems approach means that equal focus is applied to improving road design and layout, ensuring that vehicles are safe, and to helping educate and inform road users about risks so that their behaviour on roads is better. To conclude, Mr. Speaker, I would readily acknowledge that speeding is a big concern to people who live in rural parts of the island. Indeed, this is an issue in my own constituency, and I've met the Constabulary's Roads Policing Unit in order that I can understand the work that is being done to address it. I would reiterate, though, that this is a complex issue which remains a key priority for all members of the Road Safety Partnership. As set out in the Island Plan, working with stakeholders, the Department of Home Affairs will be reporting on and updating the island's road safety strategy, for which I intend to set out timescales in the Department's delivery plan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you, Minister, for that very comprehensive response. Speeding through villages and inappropriate speed on country lanes was brought up many times on the doorstep during the election campaign. It was seen as dangerous and antisocial, with many people feeling vulnerable, especially out walking and cycling. Could I ask the Minister to consider how there could be an increased visual presence and deterrent in place? And recognising the resource implications, would the Minister look at other methods, and have been mentioned, such as community speed watch volunteers, something that I believe has been successfully deployed by police forces in other jurisdictions? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, I would agree with the honourable member. As I said in my answer, it's an issue that was raised in my own constituency, and I completely recognise that for many people, inappropriate speeding on rural lanes and through villages is something that is felt very strongly by a number of people across our island. And yes, I agree with him in terms of, I mean, when I visited the Roads Policing Unit, it was very interesting to hear about the work that they do undertake, which is commonly in response, as I've said, to people raising concerns and local authorities. And in fact, with my constituency colleague, Mr. Peters, we were able to see the pattern of enforcement work that had been undertaken on various roads precisely in response to that, and you see that visible presence. But the honourable member is correct that resourcing means that we do not have sufficient staff in our Roads Policing Unit to be present in all areas where there might be a concern. So where there are, that's why the Community Safety Watch scheme, I think, will be important, and it will be an opportunity for citizens to become involved in enforcement and deterring speeding in their own communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
One more supplementary question on this, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Ballistow to St Mark's Road has many similar issues. Could that road be used to actually test existing, new and the innovative solutions that's been mentioned to actually test whether they really do work and make a difference? Thank you very much.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, and I'm familiar with that road and the challenges that have presented there in terms of speeding. As I've said, the community speed watch scheme, I think, will be an important part of helping local residents to become involved in their own communities in this space. I think the other things that are done alongside the constabulary zone enforcement is it is possible for the Department of Infrastructure to deploy devices that monitor traffic flow and the speed of vehicles. And again, these can be deployed at the request of the constabulary or indeed local authorities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members, that concludes the hour available for oral questions this morning. Mr. Moorhouse.
Understanding orders, can we extend to the end of the paper, please?
Do you have a seconder for that proposal? Mr. Ashford?
Happy to second, Mr. Speaker.
Put the question that we continue questions to their completion at this time. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. We turn then to question 13. The Honourable Member for Wishing, Dr Hayward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for Education, Sports and Culture what steps her department has taken in the last 5 years to support the recruitment of teachers in science, technology, engineering and mathematics and other subjects, and what information has been obtained from exit interviews and how that information has been used.
Call on the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is a secondary teacher recruitment working group comprising of colleagues from the Department of Enterprise, Office of Human Resources and the Department of Education, Sport and Culture to review and improve the recruitment for secondary teachers. The initiatives to date include the creation of a teacher benefits guide added to all new job adverts and available on the Locate website, information and promotion of teaching on the Isle of Man on the DFE Locate website in the Jobs in Demand section, with case studies and access for teachers to register on the portal expressing an interest in relocating to the island. Employee referral scheme has been implemented. Recruitment campaigns to promote teaching on the Isle of Man using the Locate portal and secondary teacher rolling job advert. Articles in the press include case studies in both local, Business 365, Jeff the Mongoose, Agenda, Gallery, Examiner, Manx Radio and the National Press, including TESS and the Irish Times. Targeted recruitment utilising social media, focus groups for feedback from those recently recruited to improve recruitment practices, a workforce profile modelling, succession planning analysis, including subject turnover within secondary teaching to identify which subject areas potentially are going to be vacant in the future. Improved secondary teacher job advert wording to include financial incentives for teachers relocating to the island, hosting a virtual recruitment event for secondary teacher graduates. And should a teacher leave, a leaver's email is sent from the Office of Human Resources. There is an option to complete an exit form. If the leaver chooses to complete this form and wish to attend an exit interview, they are advised to contact the Office of Human Resources. However, in light of this, the Chief Executive Officer has contacted secondary schools to provide an opportunity for any teacher who is leaving to have a discussion with him with a view to developing a better understanding as to their reasons for wanting to leave, rather than the individual having to contact the Office of Human Resources. A subject shortage allowance of £500 a month for a maximum of 8 months is provided if a teacher is offered a permanent position in maths, currently in maths, English and science. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On to question, Dr Hayward.
Thank you. The UK Department of Education carried out a survey in 2018 which looked at the reasons for teachers leaving the profession. Very few of those reasons were to do with the children they were actually teaching. Probably more of them to do with the parents. In fact, the children tended to keep teachers in their jobs for longer for fear of letting down their pupils. The reasons given were were workload, especially for early careers teaching, lack of support from leadership and government focus on data collection and results rather than student needs and learning. Which of these factors does the Minister think are most relevant and how is she proposing to address them? It's obvious that teachers leave the profession after a number of contributory factors accumulate over months, over years, and I'm disappointed to hear that the exit interviews have been optional up till now. So what will the department be doing to strengthen that? Because that's a really valuable source of information as to why people are leaving or retiring early.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Office of Human Resources has not been asked to undertake any exit interviews for teachers. That was the response we received from the Office of Human Resources. And this is the reason why the Chief Executive Officer has now reached out to all teachers that if they wish to come to the department and discuss any of their difficulties, that opportunity is there. With regards to all of the items that the Honourable Member discussed, of course, they're concerns for everybody, and the key for me and members of the department is to have a good understanding as to why people are leaving the profession, and obviously we do know with COVID that some are choosing to be close to their families.
Supplementary question, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With regard to the exit process, I actually taught for 20 years. I was never asked to give or share my thoughts. It's
now it's
I'm
not
still hurt. Never do that. No, but seriously, in terms of sending an email, on the day you leave or very soon after, you hand over your equipment, and you then don't have access to the SCH email address. So presumably, Human Resources sending out these emails, and the people have left and don't access them and don't respond, and the information's not there. Could a check be carried out, please, into that process? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and apologies, I will send you one if you would like one now, Mr Moorhouse. I'd like to understand. However, I do actually completely agree that this process is currently carried out by the Office of Human Resources. I would have thought the process included an onward email address or future address that you can be contacted with. However, I will commit to looking into this to make sure that we in the Education Department have a full understanding of why people are exiting or choosing to move away from the island.
Further supplementary, Dr Hayward.
Thank you. I hope the Minister will recognise there's quite a long time frame between when a teacher hands in their notice and when they actually leave their post, because they have to give at least a term's notice. So what's the time frame between when a teacher hands in their notice and when the advertisements for a replacement are published? How quickly does that happen? And given that there is that extended timetable and that schools have been suffering from lack of teachers and we've been appealing for those that are on the supply list or those that have left teaching to come back, what contacts have been made with those that have left teaching to determine what it would take to get them back into the classroom?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The head teacher obviously is the person who is close to the ground and understands why her individual teachers or his individual teachers are resigning. Office of Human Resources is a centralised process now, and that does make it more difficult to have access to this information. However, with regards to the comments with regards to the supply, when we were short of supply and we were having difficulties during COVID with high absences, we did contact everybody on that list to see if they were willing to come in, but as it is supply, it is on choice. It is not a contracted job. So.
Supplementary question, Mrs Kane.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Minister for her detailed answers this morning, but I just wanted to ask her, declaring an interest having children at secondary school, but with all the efforts that have gone into the recruitment of teachers and the large number we here have resigned for the range of reasons as outlined by the Minister, what reassurance can the Minister give to parents and students that there will be sufficient provision in our secondary schools in science, maths and English? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I have previously said, I think it was possibly in another place, that our commitment is to make sure that we have qualified teachers in front of all of our students all of the time. However, there are difficulties at certain times, but we are currently recruiting and we will continue to do that on a continuous basis. It's certainly with regards to the science situation that I know all honourable members have had an email with regards to that, and that there was 7 resignations in one school. We obviously are in discussions with the school to try and understand that a little bit further.
Final supplementary, Dr Hayward.
Thank you. Does the department partner with any teacher training colleges or universities to tap into graduates at source? Are the adverts sent to those universities or colleges with the science and maths degree teaching courses that we so need? And are we relying on old-fashioned methods like TES rather than using the newer methods like LinkedIn and stuff, which I'm reliably told that's where all the kids are at these days? What financial inducements have been offered to encourage applicants, and how much has that cost over the last 3 years, and how successful have those introduction schemes been?
Quite a barrage of supplementary questions there, Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I can say that obviously the department is linked with Edge Hill Teacher Training College, and their trainees come to the island and spend time placements on the island, and we do try and encourage them to come back and take up an appointment. We also have the head teacher from Ballacomune has recently been away to Edgehill to try and do some recruitment, so that is an ongoing process. With regards to incentives, currently for those relocating or returning to the island, there could be contributions up to £4,000, and we also give help towards housing costs, and that is currently £500 a month for 2 years. Obviously, we will be reviewing all of this with regards to recruitment and retention for, they are our key workers and we do need teachers in front of our students. However, there is many other support staff within schools and cover supervisors that are not necessarily qualified teachers, and we need to be looking at the right balance and structure for our schools.
Question 14, I call the Honourable Member for Arbory, Castletown, Malew, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture what her department is doing to help its schools deliver mental wellbeing programmes.
I call the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Staff in schools are closely attuned to the mental health and wellbeing of the students they teach. Health and wellbeing of children and young people is a strategic priority for the department, and officers work closely with the schools to develop programmes designed to enable children and young people to manage their mental health and wellbeing. There are several programmes available at universal level for schools to follow, and when required, officers train and support staff in the delivery of these. At primary schools, this includes promoting alternative thinking strategies and Jigsaw, both of which aim to empower all children to make positive choices in their lives and adopt mindful approaches to learning and well-being. The department has recently worked closely with the Child and Adolescents Mental Health Service to promote the use of Garff, an online mental well-being community accessed by all pupils. Garff is an anonymous site which helps children and young people to feel safe and confident in exploring their concerns and seeking professional help. Officers also deliver youth mental health first aid and mental health awareness training. This training enables school staff to gain an understanding of factors which affect children and young people's mental health and well-being. It gives them practical skills to recognise the triggers and signs of any mental health issues and confidence to reassure and support a young person in distress. Finally, the department is working closely with other agencies such as Manx Care, the third sector and private organisations to strengthen the universal offer of mental health in schools whilst building appropriate pathways for additional or complex support. This includes the EdPsych support as appropriate. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. When the department says the well-being of children is a strategic priority, what does that mean and how will that be measured? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And obviously it is a strategic priority. It is something that we know there does appear to have been, I wouldn't say a worsening situation, but it has, the COVID pandemic has impacted some of our children. With regards to what is the department doing about it, we will be making sure that our teachers have the training and the necessary support to be able to support the children. The teacher is best placed, as well as working with the third sector.
Supplementary, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Does the Minister recognise this will be the perfect arena for DHSC and DES to combine some of their resources with the third sector to benefit not only the current generation of children, but also the future generations? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I did say in my original answer that we are working with Manx Care and the third sector to build appropriate pathways, and we will continue to do that.
Question 15, I call on the Honourable Member for Wishing, Dr Hayward.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture whether any secondary school lessons in personal, social, health and economic education, including sex education, are being delivered by religious groups.
The Minister for Education, Sport and Culture to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Under the Education Curriculum Order 2011, maintained schools are required to promote the personal, spiritual, moral, social and cultural development of all pupils. Some personal, social, health and economic content, known as PSHE, at the request of individual schools, may be delivered by outside agencies. These arrangements are made between schools and those agencies and are designed to complement a broad and balanced PSHE curriculum and enhance provision using the wider expertise available. Currently, lessons that are delivered in schools in collaboration with groups may include Love Life, the Scripture Union Ministries Trust known as SUMT offer the Love Life programme to Year 10 and 12 pupils in secondary schools. Love Life is a facilitated sex and relationships course offered to schools free of charge. The material has been planned, practised and reviewed since 2012 and has been delivered to a consistently high standard to many Year 10 and 12 students in that time. While some lessons include the deliverance of facts around relationships and sex, much of the course has facilitated discussion, debate and engagement with students. There is an agreement in place between SUMT and DESC which states content has to be agreed prior to delivery by the school. This agreement guards against any religious bias. PSHE days, DESC coordinates drop-down days which are multi-agency collaborations designed to deliver specialist input on key themes. Representatives from the Isle of Man Constabulary, school nursing team, youth service and third sector all deliver during these events. Content is shared with DESC prior to delivery and is designed to meet the needs of the young people across a range of PSHE issues. You Matter is a programme for Year 8 students, was developed by the Love Life programme coordinator in consultation with DESC, supported by Greer and the Isle of Man Constabulary. It focuses on key relevant themes such as allowing young people to explore their identity and emotions, looking at who and what can influence their lives, and how to stay safe in different situations, including relationships. The Department is also evaluating the impact of a recently created relationships and sex education framework guidance document for secondary schools. The Department is working with primary heads and practitioners to review the current provision and identify gaps in order to devise and implement relationships and sex education guidance for primary schools. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Dr. Hayward.
Thank you. What steps are taken to obtain consent from parents for their children who are receiving lessons from faith groups? Parents have to sign various consent forms for various school activities, and if faith groups teaching PSHE lessons in schools do not represent the beliefs of the child or the family, how is this managed within schools?
Minister's reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regards to how the schools monitor that, the teachers would obviously be aware of what the lesson is about within PSHE. It is part of the curriculum, and on a number of occasions, parents can make that choice, and I'm sure the parents would liaise with the teacher if they were concerned about any of the content that was being delivered.
Question, Ms. Farragut.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That was an awful lot of curriculum that's kind of taken over by these groups. And I wanted to ask the Minister about whether parents are given a choice, about whether their child is given these sessions via groups whose stated aim is evangelism. In many parents' experience, and in fact my own as a parent, children who are removed from these school lessons and assemblies aren't offered a substitute lesson or experience, and often sit either alone in a room or with a teacher who is engaged in other activities. And that does leave the parent in a quandary because the child doesn't want to do that. Can the Minister confirm if there is a framework in place for offering alternatives to these sessions or lessons run by evangelistic groups? And if not, will she commit to looking into this? Thank you.
Minister's reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure I agree with everything that the Honourable Member has said. However, I will commit to, obviously, I'd welcome the Honourable Member to come and meet with me with her concerns, and obviously we can discuss this and show any framework that is in place.
Supplementary question, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I just say that in the past I've had some of my lessons delivered by such a group and others, as the Minister did suggest, and it adds a new variety and something quite different to the lessons. They were always delivered in a professional manner, and I was always really quite relieved because some of the issues that were dealt with were better dealt with by a third party. And there was always a classroom teacher sat in while this material was being delivered. So it did add something and offer the children that third party to deliver it and to talk to and share their thoughts with. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you for that statement. No question. Dr. Hayward, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Minister aware that some of the people involved in the Love Life programme have actually stated publicly quite extreme opinions, including the intention to oppose the Abortion Act, and have described the Act as inhumane and vowed to campaign against it, and they are named people in the Love Life programme? What screening is done on the people that are going into schools to ensure that actually their beliefs are not fed through into the classroom, and so that they're not carrying through points of view that some of us would find completely unacceptable into young impressionable children?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I've stated, the content is looked at by the department to make sure that there is no biased views there, and I would welcome from the member anything that she's commented there with regards to content that she's seen. If she can pass that on to me, I'd be grateful.
Okay, in which case we move to question 16. They're calling the Honourable Member for Arbory, Castletown, Malew. Mr Glover.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for Enterprise how much financial support has been offered to A, feature films and B, television productions in each of the last 2 years.
Call the Minister for Enterprise to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his very interesting question. The Department currently does not offer any financial assistance towards directly supporting individual film or TV productions. Therefore, no financial assistance has been offered directly to feature films or television productions in the last 2 years. However, the Department has provided financial support to media production companies involved in producing content for television or other services. Currently, the Department's focus is on businesses which will establish a permanent presence, premises and employees on the island, rather than one-off productions which will just create temporary employment. Businesses that have received financial assistance for establishing a base here or are expanding their operation on Ireland are listed in the Enterprise Act 2008 annual report. The latest report will be laid at the March sitting of Tynwald. This report, along with the previous versions, are available on the Department's website. Thank you.
Under question, Mr Glover.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could the Minister tell the House why a three-part ITV series written by Anne-Marie Lamb and starring Sir Anne Jones in the lead role, a well-established actress, and featuring the Isle of Man, is now going to be shot in the Isle of Wight in Ireland as representing the Isle of Man?
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I don't want to talk about individual cases because that wouldn't be right with the people, without the people's consent. I understand various emails were sent to various political members lobbying on behalf of this production company. In the United Kingdom, there is a tax credit scheme which basically gives production companies upfront funding for various productions, but the film production company must be within the UK corporation tax net to qualify for tax credits. The Isle of Man does not have corporation tax, and therefore we don't have the same tax credit system here and can't give that upfront funding out of taxpayers' money. I can reassure the Honourable Member that the various people involved in this production met with the Department. It was explained to them that the tax credit system did not extend to the United Kingdom. However, they were offered support in terms of instructions to crew, equipment hire, and to facilitate any logistics, such as road closures, if needed. And we're hopeful that some of this production can take place on the Isle of Man. But again, we do not at the moment have the facility to use taxpayers' money to fund one-off productions on the Isle of Man. Thank you.
Any questions, Mr Moorhouse?
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for that last answer. Many companies use product placement as a key aspect of their marketing strategies. Many of us received an email recently from a production company. Is this an area the Department would consider to promote the island in the future? Is it something the Visit Agency could potentially get involved with? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And again, I don't really want to go into what has appeared at times to be some lobbying of political members regarding one particular production. What I can say is the financial assistance scheme, as I've said, gives a range of subsidies and grants to businesses starting up on the island. We also have a digital creation assistance scheme which similarly can help with creating jobs and prosperity on the island in terms of the media sector, and we are committed to that. In terms of financing productions using taxpayers' money to somehow produce product placement, I think we'd have to be very careful with which productions we were actually sponsoring. In terms of the tax credit system in the UK, they have a range of different qualifications for that in terms of the scripts. And I don't think that is necessarily something that government would want to be involved with. I'd also like to remind honourable members that the Public Accounts Committee last year published a report on the previous Media Investment Fund and stated that it was regrettable that in 2012 the pre-2007 income figures were still being quoted in order to support assertions of financial sustainability, when in reality there was a new model in which the films invested in were not delivering tangible cash returns, nor did they often deliver tangible returns in terms of our culture, because often people weren't quite sure where the films were being filmed. Thank you.
Question, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the clarity about the Media Investment Fund. That's very helpful. And along similar lines, can the Minister advise, or confirm at least, what appears to be stated in the Isle of Man Government Audited Accounts, but though in a slightly confusing way, that the Isle of Man Film Limited and the Isle of Man Film DOI Limited are now dormant companies and that we don't have companies operating in that space. And secondly, that those same accounts seem to show that at the end of the life of those companies, there was £635,000 available inside those companies. Can the Minister advise where that money went to? Because I know at one point the Arts Council in particular, but the artistic community very more generally got very excited about small-scale production, and then that money has apparently vanished and is no longer available for that purpose. So can the Minister advise whether there's small amounts of money available for small people to get involved in this sort of thing?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we're completely straying off the subject of this initial question, which was what financial support has been offered to film and television production in each of the last 2 years. But I can answer the honourable member's question in terms of short films, not done by short people, but short films, that funding is available through the Arts Council for this. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr. Glover.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Minister aware, though, of the substantial benefits that regions have had with getting behind a TV series such as Doc Martin, The Bay, Shetland? And have we had our fingers burnt a little bit and are lacking imagination from events that have happened in the past?
Minister's reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I mean, in terms of financial benefit from films being shot in various locations, I think some of the evaluation of that hasn't shown that initial investment has produced the right results. And although there are large numbers of films being produced for streaming services now, these are often done in studio at reduced cost. And I'd like to draw the honourable members' attention to the recent decision by Netflix, not to shoot the Lord of the Rings series in New Zealand and to do it in other jurisdictions. So I think we need to be very careful how government is seen to spend taxpayers' money to promote films and television productions that may not actually generate employment and wealth for the very people who are paying for it.
Question, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in the light of that last answer, it seems that the Minister doesn't have the information available, so can the Minister circulate to members and publish where the £500,000 plus that seem to remain inside the Isle of Man Film Limited investments has gone, because it hasn't been received by Culture Vannin, and I believe that the Arts Council also did quite a lot of work on working in that space and haven't actually received any money either.
Staying beyond the scope of the question about financial support being offered in the last 2 years.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, we're straying off of the subject. I'd suggest that if the honourable member has questions about issues regarding the financial statements of Treasury, he address those with Treasury. Thank you.
Final supplementary, Mrs. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, I've been quite close to digital agency over the past 5 years. But this kind of major production didn't come up. And what I would like to ask the Minister is, has the department lost the ability to be agile because of having fingers burnt with Media Investment Fund, because of moving away from the film industry standard and having that kind of infrastructure on the Isle of Man? And would he consider having a mechanism to assess each production on its merits? This one in particular was to be set in the Isle of Man. It wanted a sum of 900 and something £1,000 contribution, which is the same amount that the marketing to the visit agency received in marketing. How much marketing do you think the Isle of Man would be as a showcase on Prime ITV TV with Sir Anne Jones? So I think it's a shame if this is the one that got away, but has the Minister any reassurance that the department could look at a mechanism whereby productions could be assessed on their merit, because surely the amount of spend on the Isle of Man would be close to the sum being sought, and then the benefits would be in the future for screening. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for all the time she spent in the Department for Enterprise looking at these sort of applications. In terms of the individual case that she and other members are aiming to support, I don't want to comment on that in particular, because I don't think any of us have read the script yet. In terms of investing in that, but I can reassure her that the department will remain agile, will remain open to inquiries, and will judge each application on its merit. And in fact, the digital agency reached out to the people behind this production, met with them personally, and offered them any assistance that we could give them to actually film this successfully on the Isle of Man. Thank you.
Question 17, calling the Honourable Member for Arbory, Castletown and Malew, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Chair of the Manchester Utilities Authority by what percentage electricity tariffs will increase this year and in future years, and if we will make a statement.
The Chairman of the Manchester Utilities Authority to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for the question this morning. As agreed by Tynwald in 2018, tariff increases follow the Consumer Price Index (CPI) rate published in September each year, which was 5%. In addition, a further fuel cost increase is being considered for electricity unit rates only in order to address the ongoing impact of the global energy crisis, which is exposing energy suppliers, including Manx Utilities, to exceptionally high wholesale natural gas prices. The fuel cost increase required on top of the 5% CPI is currently being assessed following the Board's recommendation to provide a number of options for consideration by the Council of Ministers. This is despite our prudent hedging of 70% of our fuel requirements for the current financial year and the forward purchasing of just over 50% of our expected gas purchases for electricity generation for 2022-2023 at an average cost of 47 pence per therm. Originally, we would have announced our tariffs by now, but we're very aware of the impact of rising bills is having on individuals and businesses, and it is important that we try to do all we can to minimise the level of increase. As such, I'm not in a position to advise what the final percentage increase will be at this time, but I can advise it is currently spans between 5% and up to and towards 39%. We're also watching an extremely volatile market around Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, which could create further pressure for the energy price and its market. I would also like to make it very clear that we're currently seeing forward pricing for natural gas for the summer of 2022 and the winter of 2022 above 200 pence per therm, which is almost 4 times the average price, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chair, for giving us insight into that very challenging process. Given the escalating energy prices, what is the total amount now spent keeping the bills at their current level and absorbing the price increases? And what's the source of that money? How is the MUA imagining to keep this going? Thank you.
Chairman to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his supplementary question. At the moment, the Manx Utilities have absorbed from its reserves around £16 million. And as I say, that has come from funds within the organisation. However, as we enter into a new financial year, that's just not sustainable. And for that reason, we have to look at setting increased tariffs from the 1st of April 2022.
Further supplementary, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 16 million figure is the one that was given in the budget 2 weeks ago, so presumably that is now more significant. Given the time element here, as the Chairman asked to bring forward a price increase, or is a price increase going to arrive at a set time? And with regard to the policy, rather than being based on the sheer costs and the management of the MUA, you've taken on the role of actually supporting individuals and businesses. That's quite a radical departure. Is the Council of Ministers being supportive in taking on that challenge? Thank you.
Chairman to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't obviously speak for the previous board and the directions they took, but the organisation and the authority absorbed around £60 million. That was the figure heading into this new year, and obviously that may be slightly higher by the end of the financial year. That does equate to around £180 per household per business that the organisations absorbed, and I think it's absolutely right that we did support businesses and individuals as we went through the winter period. We would normally have announced any increase by the end of February, but unfortunately we're just not in a position to make the final decision just yet.
Supplementary question, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the former chair, but one, was announcing the MUA pricing strategy for electricity prices, he talked about the strategy will see charges and costs established for a 5-year period and include obligations on Manx utilities to continue to deliver efficiencies and cost-effective services. And then he went on to say that the strategy is consistent with government's social, economic and environmental policies, and Manx Utilities is committed to working with government to support low and middle income households who will not be disadvantaged by these changes. Can the Chair give further information about how Manx Utilities is supporting low and middle income households to make sure that they're not disadvantaged by electricity price changes, and what efficiencies and cost effective services have resulted from that commitment in 2018?
Broadening the scope of this question, Mr. Cole.
I think it's well outside the scope of the question, but I think I've already answered that part, Mr. Speaker, by saying that the MUA has supported every house, every business over the last financial year, especially over the winter period. I think if there's questions about additional support, that needs to be tabled towards the Treasury Minister in respect of helping low and income families more than what we've already done as an organisation and as an authority. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has the board been unanimous in keeping prices as they are? Because it must be an incredibly challenging decision to make. And has any independent advice been received about the financial implications of taking on this extra debt? And finally, with regard to the users of key meters, they're already paying substantially more, and going forward, it's going to be difficult to make those payments. Apparently, to get an update to a debit card will take 10 days, but to get to change to a normal meter could take 18 months. So could that area also be looked at, please? Thank you.
To reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regard to the meters, I'm going to leave that because there is a presentation coming towards members. So that's well outside the question. With regards to the extra debt, the previous board obviously made that decision with regards to helping and supporting businesses and families. It isn't an extra debt, as I've just already mentioned in my original response. The funds came from reserves. It has put additional pressure on the organisation. We also have to be mindful that the authority has to pay back its bonds in less than 8 years' time. This is a national crisis at the moment, an energy crisis that is not just happening here in the Isle of Man, it's also happening in the UK and in Europe. We're obviously in communications with the Council of Ministers, with Treasury, to try and navigate our way around to make the right decision for our islands and for people who we already acknowledge are struggling over the winter period because of higher inflation costs, food costs and energy costs from other providers.
Final supplementary, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the bonds are in 8 years and in 12 years, and the largest one is in 12 years, so we have time. But I just wanted to pick up on some of the information that the Chair has imparted in his budget speech, and more so today. So we've now had the 16 million described as extra debt and also as reserves. Can the Chair undertake to provide very detailed information about exactly where that 16 million has come from? Because it could well be that water ratepayers, sewerage ratepayers, telecoms users and gas users have been paying to subsidise electricity generation and distribution by the Manx Utilities Authority, and we need to have clarity about that. To help the Chair, I have put down a written question to him, which I hope he can take a great deal of care in actually answering, and I hope today I can just get an undertaking to answer that question. And secondly, I am quite surprised to learn how much the Council of Ministers is involved in setting the price. I thought we had an MUA board, I thought we had MUA executive, I thought the Treasury had representatives on that process, and I thought that the MUA was had a Tynwald approved pricing strategy to set its prices. So perhaps the Chair, either today or perhaps better and later, can actually advise how the government is involved in setting the electricity price.
Thank you. Again, I'll just repeat that. There's no extra debt at this moment in time, Mr. Speaker. We've actually already said that the actual funds came from reserves. This was money that we've built up, which we're hoping to use for other purposes, such as pay back the bond earlier, in order which will help businesses in this island. Just to be very clear, Mr. Speaker, as I've mentioned, we are in the middle of an energy crisis. It's absolutely right that we speak to our colleagues in Treasury and the Council of Ministers to make them aware of this, in order that we can get as much help to make the tariff set at a reasonable level that has the minimal impact on our customers on the island. Not just for customers, also businesses that are actually coming back from 2 years after COVID. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.